there is a sense that the plotters were quite inept because they didn't manage to blow up Parliament, but actually they were incredibly close.
Welcome to the British History channel and podcast, Elizabeth, again, and Stephen for the first time. You are going on stage shortly at the Harvington Hall for the Harvington History Festival, where you're going to be bombarded with questions, I believe, about the Gunpowder plot, alongside Nadine and Pete, who I've just interviewed as well. So, for anyone who doesn't know who you are, can you give us a bit of background? We'll go Elizabeth first.
So I am Elizabeth Norton, and I tend to write books on the Tudors and Queenship. I've got a new book coming out called Women Who Ruled the World, 5,000 Years of Female Monarchy. But I'm really on this panel. My PhD was on a Catholic family in the Elizabethan period, so I'm here really to talk about the Catholics.
I'm Stephen Alford. I teach history, professor of history at the University of Leeds, and I've written a number of books on Tudor history, mid-Tudor history and later Tudor history, and I suppose my sort of main field is sort of Elizabethan political history, and I've published a book called All His Spies about Robert Cecil, who's quite important in the story of the Gunpowder plot.
To begin with, let's go through what are people's perceptions of the Gunpowder plot, first of all.
I think modern perceptions are, it's very much based on bonfire night, the 5th, remember the 5th of November. And I think, everybody knows Guy Fawkes, of course, although he's not really the leader of the plot. I think other than that, people are slightly woolly on what actually happened. There's a sense that they were trying to blow up the king. I'm not sure people entirely understand the kind of sectarian nature that much, not sort of generally in Britain today. There obviously are some areas that do. It's really become a bit of a sort of a holiday. It's an excuse to go and have some fireworks and a hot dog.
Yeah, must have the hot dog. Even sort of penny for the guy has died out over the last few years, hasn't it?
I think Halloween has a lot to do with that.
That is
taken over, yeah.
That's very true, actually.
And I wonder whether in part that is because it's a bit of a kind of head-scratching event, really. What was it? I remember being of a certain age, growing up with a sense of Guy Fawkes as a baddie.
Yeah.
But why he was a baddie, and why on earth anyone would want to blow up Parliament. Maybe many feelings these days that people might have some sympathy with the general kind of feel, but broadly why somebody would want to do that, an event on an epic scale, it's a bit of a mystery, really, I think. And I think that's one of the things that I suppose it is myth busting in a sense, or maybe it's kind of context giving for the history, but it's just the scale of what Fawkes and co were planning, which is massive. This would have been the 9/11 terrorist event of the 17th century. This would have been off the map in terms of plots and conspiracies. And it didn't happen, so it's very easy to have the celebrations and bonfire and, all the rest of it, and think, oh, well, it's an easy victory, but it wasn't. So I think to get to something of that seems really important this afternoon, actually.
I agree, and I think there is a sense that the plotters were quite inept because they didn't manage to blow up Parliament, but actually they were incredibly close.
They were very
Guy
close.
Fawkes was down there in a cellar filled with gunpowder, sitting at a fuse. It was very, very close. And I think, you don't want to give them too much credit for nearly blowing up Parliament, but actually I think we should credit them with more sense than they're often sort of implied to have had. They're not lightweights. They are people who came very, very close to enacting regime change, and as Stephen said, an act of terrorism on an enormous scale.
Because if they had have succeeded, what would have been, say, the immediate result? And then we'll talk about the possible of how that would have gone. But what's the immediate result? What does the location look like? Who would have been annihilated along with the House of Parliament?
Well, Fawkes himself says, or at least the Attorney General and the Lord Chief Justice in their first questioning of Fawkes, they say, well, why, the King? and the nobility, and the judges, and the principal members of the House of Commons, and then there's not just the king, but members of the royal family as well. And it's pretty much the entire elite that would have either gone up in smoke or been crushed by rubble, or been poisoned by noxious gases from the explosion. So, I mean, it is pretty much the whole kind of upper crust establishment, really.
So when you say regime change, Elizabeth, that is absolute. What were their plans for change then? Because this is an annihilation of the ruling class. What were their plans for the change?
So they do have plans. This is when they become a little bit less competent in that, the blowing up Parliament, killing all of the elite off is, that really could have worked. They then decide that they're going to kidnap Princess Elizabeth, James's eldest daughter, and make her a puppet queen, effectively. And this is where it's not so clear that this could have worked, because actually they're still a fairly random group of gentry. Actually being able to set up, even if they've got hold of Elizabeth, actually being able to set up as a government is possibly a bit of a stretch. She's also a Protestant, of course, and is unlikely to be particularly sympathetic when these people have just blown up her parents.
And do any of them have any experience of governance? Like, do they actually know how they're going to run the country?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so, no. I mean, and Robert Catesby, who's really the kind of principal behind it, he has the idea, I think, in the first place, in the spring of 1604, although he's been sort of on the edges of this sort of plotting kind of for a few years. But, his sort of extremist imagination is, we'll just get rid of them all. People will be happy. There's some notion that there's going to be some kind of popular choice of ruler, but there's no plan at all, which is extraordinary, really.
And they don't have the experience because they've been excluded because they're Catholics, and they're very much on the margins of kind of political life. They have to be quite furtive, quite careful. So they don't have the contacts really either. I think, probably by that stage, most people in England are Protestant. In Scotland, they certainly are by that stage. So actually thinking that they can impose a Catholic government is probably wishful thinking.
Yeah.
So do they have any public support?
No.
No. Do they think they do?
They think they probably do. I think they probably do. But when Catesby and others make it into the Midlands, for their last stand, their hope over 24 hours or so is to kind of raise the local people and to raise the Catholic gentry. And people look the other way or run in the opposite direction, and they're left holed up, and then half blow themselves up with a charge of gunpowder, with some irony. Their play that they have, I think, certainly Catesby has that sort of, I think, paranoid frame of mind of an extremist, of people who've been isolated and marginalised over a very, very long period of time. So their sense of kind of balance and judgment, they may be quite good on the organisational nuts and bolts of a plot and gathering gunpowder and, doing all the arrangements. But their sense of balance otherwise, in terms of what they're going to achieve and what they're going to do after the explosion, I think is so kind of off the scale. I think they have no great sort of sense of judgment, really, about the realities of England in 1605.
Yeah, I mean, James is a relatively popular king. He's only 2 years on the throne. Came to the throne with general acclaim, really. He didn't do what the Catholics hoped he would do. He doesn't introduce any sense of toleration or tolerance, but actually they weren't going to get that really from any Protestant ruler. So I think most English Catholics in James's reign and also in Elizabeth's reign just want to be left alone, really, keep their heads down. So actually when this happens, it makes things worse for them, because suddenly Catholics are the enemy again, and everyone's starting to look at their neighbours.
So what does happen in the aftermath then, especially towards Catholics? What's the attitude like?
Well, it focuses people. I mean, Catholics are already kind of everybody's favourite bogeyman, if you like, in England at the time. You know, there's this sense that Catholics are behind everything and they're seen as evil. And I mean, it really ramps it up. And we see the religious divisions in Charles I's reign, when actually Archbishop Laud, for example, you know, the main stick that's used to beat him is people say he's a Catholic. He's not a Catholic, but actually that's such a slur because it's illegal to worship as a Catholic in England, has been since 1559. It's illegal to harbour priests. It's obviously illegal to be a priest. Actually, it's very much an underground religion, and it just increases suspicions, it increases penalties against them, and it's just a nightmare for Catholics in the period.
And when Parliament does meet, eventually, there's a whole new raft of Elizabethan-style penal legislation. So rather than the sort of loosening of the grip on the English Catholic community, it's ratcheted up, you know, ever more severely. And you know that's one of the realities, I think, behind this idea that the whole thing was staged by the government. You know, some Catholics, you know, make allegations at people like the Earl of Salisbury, the King's right hand in many ways, that it had to be Salisbury who was behind this, and this was some sort of terrible, devious way of making life even more painful for Catholics, and even eliminating English Catholics once and for all. You know, liquidating, in a sense, the entire community. So a lot of that sort of conspiratorial thinking about what the plot was and who was behind it is very much sort of charged by this post-plot atmosphere, I think.
Well, I mean, what do you think would have happened if they had have succeeded?
My guess would be it would kickstart the Civil War some decades early, potentially, albeit that they've lost the elite, really. You know, but England was really divided then. You know, if you go up to Lancashire in the period, for example, almost everyone is still a Catholic. Other parts, you know, if you go into East Anglia, they're almost all Protestants. You know, there are huge divisions. And I can't really see that it wouldn't have done anything else but civil war. There may be some level of foreign invasion, although Spain was very keen to stay out of the Catholic affairs, at least kind of openly in this period.
I do wonder about that. I wonder whether it may have been too tempting an opportunity, actually. I mean, the conditions early in James's reign are really interesting because you have the end to Anglo-Spanish war, which has been rumbling since the 1580s, and finally there's a peace. So this is one of the frustrations of Catesby, Fawkes and co, that actually they have to do something on their own because for a number of years they've been trying to get Spanish support, but actually the diplomacy of the Spanish court in the Low Countries, the Spanish Flanders, is leaning towards making peace with James. So the international and diplomatic context is quite complicated, but there may have been some kind of invasion, even by the back door. I mean, I wonder about actually what eventually we now know as Great Britain, and that sort of fuller union and connection between England and Scotland. The dynastic thread would have been broken there. So the relationship between a independent Scotland, independent England, may again have just been much more complicated than it sort of turned out to be, with the Stuarts as a kind of dynastic connection between Scotland, England, and the Tudors bringing Ireland. So, I mean, the whole of British history, I think, would have been very different.
And of course, if Elizabeth does become queen, and probably she would, regardless of who was controlling her, actually she'd be an incredibly tempting marriage target for, you know, half the princes of Europe, because, you know, if you can acquire Elizabeth, you become the king if you marry her.
And then do you have England as a satellite, you know, much as it had been during Mary's reign, in a sense. In the 16th century, with Philip II of Spain as Mary I's husband, where it's part of a, you know, bigger global power, and with perhaps England on the edges. So, yeah, the what ifs are really interesting.
They are. Wow, well, I better let you go because you have to prepare for being bombarded with even more questions.
Thank you. Well, you've warmed us up.
Yes, absolutely. This
You've
is
warmed
great.
us up beautifully. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before we go, is there somewhere online that people can find your work and find what you do? Elizabeth, do you want to go first, Steve?
Yes, so the best place to find me is on social media. I am Norton History, so Norton, Norton History, everywhere, basically. So come and find me and say hi.
I'm absolutely opposite end. I'm a kind of social media phobe. So I don't, but the best thing to do is go and have a look at the Penguin Books website. You'll find a list of books. Yeah, it's the best. Otherwise, you'll find me as a hermit in a cave.
You've probably got the right idea, to be fair. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.